Welcome to Sunday School. I hope you enjoyed listening to a little bit of Mary Beth playing something from Brahms' Requiem. It's called How Lovely is Thy Dwelling Place, O Lord. It's one of those beautiful melodies from classical music. And what's wonderful, too, is that it's a great way to start off our psalm for the day because, of course, Psalm 84 says that very thing, how lovely are your dwelling places. This is a wonderful psalm, especially for us right now, when we are questioning a lot of things about being together and about being in church. What I think is wonderful about this psalm is that it stresses so very sincerely how important it is to find a place to be with God, to find sacred places. I don't know about you, but there are a lot of places in the world that are sacred, and not just because they're religious, but because they have special meaning to you, or to me, or to somebody that we love. Sometimes that might be a home that we grew up in. That can be a sacred place, a place that is so meaningful. For some, it's going to a Hall of Fame or something to see some great baseball player or football player or basketball player or whatever, somebody that you really identify with. Those can be sacred places too. Think about if you're a fan of the Red Sox, what's it like going to Boston for the first time and sitting there in the stadium and what excitement there is in that. That can be a sacred moment, especially to you. If you're a fan, and if you're not, I'm sorry about that. But nonetheless, then there of course are sacred places that we go all the time. Of course, one of those is our beautiful sanctuary. And, when I was younger, I used to think it wasn't all that important to go to sacred places. The first time that I went to Israel, I thought, this will be great. We'll see the Holy Land. We'll see the sites that Jesus, where Jesus walked today where Jesus walked. How it is, and all. But I thought, but it's not really that big of a deal to me because God's with us everywhere. I feel His presence with me every day, and so why do I need that? But I want to tell you something, that there is something wonderful that happens when you go to a place expecting that the Spirit is going to be there. And what is wonderful to know is that the Spirit never disappoints us. The Spirit shows up when we show up. And so I think that's one of the hardest things that we've had in this time of pandemic is just being able to get together. And I'm so glad that we can do it just a little bit and that we can stay connected through this means as well. Well, Psalm 84 that we're talking about today is about sacred places, and one in particular, of course, it's about the temple in Jerusalem. The temple was the center of Jewish life throughout the life of Israel, on into the time of Jesus and after as well. It was just such an important place because that is the place that God covenanted with His people, and He said, I will put my name there, I will dwell there, I will live there. And so it was important and required that all the Israelites went to Jerusalem, to the temple, at least 3 times a year. For the three main feasts, for Passover, for the Festival of Tabernacles, and for the Festival of Shavuot, which was Pentecost. And so there were those 3 times, and of course they would come on the Day of Atonement as well. So these were times where they had to be before the presence of the Lord, had to make sacrifice and the like. Well, so Psalm 84 then is a pilgrimage psalm. It's about making our way to Jerusalem. There are a lot of these in the Psalms, especially in the 120s and 130s, that are wonderful. Some of those are very short, but they give us a wonderful insight into the zeal that must have been with these pilgrims going up to Jerusalem. And again, Jerusalem is always up because it's higher than all the places around it. So we always go up to Jerusalem no matter where you're coming from. Well, so let's dive in and see what Psalm 84 says. It starts out, it has one of those little titles. It says, for the director of music, according to Gittith, of the sons of Korah, a psalm. Now, we don't know what the Gittith or Gittit meant. It's a Hebrew word, probably some musical word. And the sons of Korah were the descendants of those people who rebelled against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness when the Israelites were wandering for 40 years in the wilderness. At one point, a group rebelled, and they were all followers of Korah. But by the time of David, and even into the time of Solomon and later, they were gatekeepers and musicians in the temple and in the tabernacle before that. And so, there are several psalms that are attributed to these sons of Korah. So, this is just a Levite group, and that were musicians and were in charge of things at the temple. Well, let's get in and see exactly what they say. They say, "How lovely is your dwelling place, Lord Almighty." I want to hone in on one word there, lovely. Lovely is a word to us that may not have a whole lot of meaning. To say something is lovely is sometimes a way of saying, well, something's nice, or something's okay. It's lovely. And sometimes it cannot really say a whole lot. But here, when he uses this word, the psalmist is telling us that he desires this so much that it is an inner kind of a love. It's kind of like it's the love that we have for our spouse, even. It's that kind of a love. It's a longing. It's like absence has made his heart grow fonder and fonder. And so he's longing to see the temple and to be in the courts of the Lord. And he also uses that word dwelling place. Now, for the Hebrew, it's actually dwelling places. But, they're talking about one place, and they're talking about Jerusalem. But he just so longed to meet with God. And then he goes even further in verse 2. He says, "My soul yearns, even faints, for the courts of the Lord. My heart and my flesh cry out for the living God." Can you imagine something that you just pine for? And that's what that means, even faints. He's pining over this. Is there any place that you just pine for, or any person that you long for that much? This is how much the psalmist yearns and longs and pines to be in the presence of the Lord. And there, this word too that says "my soul," that is a funny word. In Hebrew, it is a word, it's the word nephesh, which means life force, complete, total being, inside and out. It's like every bit of you, every bit of him, he's wanting to be with the Lord. He's wanting to be in his presence. My entire being cries out to be with the living God. And then he goes on in verse 3. He says, "Even the sparrow has found a home, and the swallow a nest for herself, where she may have her young, a place near your altar, Lord Almighty, my King and my God." Even the sparrow, one of the smallest of birds, and what he's doing, he's making this beautiful visual scene where even in the crags and the crevices of the walls of the temple, and on top of it, he can see the birds, that they're comfortable there. They're at home, right there in the presence of the Lord. And he longs to be one of those. He longs to be one of those faithful worshipers who feels security at the Lord's altar. Verse 4, he goes on and says, "Blessed are those who dwell in your house. They are ever praising you." Now, he of course, he's been alluding to these birds that live, on the temple or near the temple. But really, he's getting at something even more powerful. He's saying that I want to be one of those. I want to be one of those people who longs for the temple. I want to be one of those who longs for the presence of the Lord, that holy place. It's so important. We will be happy, he says, blessed. Blessed just means happy or fortunate or full of blessing, full of the joy that comes from being in his presence. Verse 5, he starts to focus on the blessedness of the pilgrimage to Jerusalem. And of course, with the ultimate goal of appearing in Zion before God himself. And so in verse 5, he says, "Blessed are those whose strength is in you, whose hearts are set on pilgrimage." Hearts, that's the innermost being of a person. And so it could also be translated as their every thought is on the pilgrim highways leading to Jerusalem. Meaning that every thought that they have is on this one thing, that they are of one mind and of one great focus, to be in the presence of the Lord, to see God. And then, this is how good it gets. In verse 6, he says, "As they pass through the valley of Baca, they make it a place of springs. The autumn rains also cover it with pools." Now, the Valley of Baca is not a place that anybody has ever been able to find. So, it's an unknown location. But what he's getting at, he's using this visual of the driest place on the face of the earth. And believe me, there are some dry spots in the land of Israel. Go to the Dead Sea. It is dry and barren there. No life there. That's why they call it the Dead Sea, is because you don't go there to live. And so there are places like that. And you know what, though? There are places like that in our own lives where sometimes we are going through a series of struggles. This right now is a struggle for all of us, for our country, for the world. And so we're fully aware of what struggle is like. Nobody is immune to that, to struggle and hardship. And so what the psalmist is getting at here is he's telling us that even in the driest desert, in our valley of Baca, which Baca sounds like the word for weeping, for crying, for weeping. So when we are in our valley of weeping, he waters the place. He makes it a beautiful spring. He makes it all good. Remember, we've talked about this before, that God is in the recreation business. He makes everything new, and that even includes our valleys of weeping. In verse 7, they go from strength to strength till each appears before God in Zion. Strength to strength is like success after success. That's not necessarily worldly success or monetary success, but it's success in access to the Lord, which is more important than anything. It progresses that we go from one to the next. And then moving into verses 8 and 9, we have a prayer on behalf of the king. Of course, the King David, or a follower of David in his line. As the king prospers in Jerusalem, the faithful are more prosperous. And it says in verse 8, "Hear my prayer, Lord God Almighty. Listen to me, God of Jacob." Calling God out and saying, we know that you're here. We know that you're listening. "Look on our shield, O God. Look with favor on your anointed one." Of course, the shield is the one who protects. And they're saying that the one, not only does God protect, but the leader protects them. And when the leader is protected, everything seems better. And then one of the best parts of this chapter, of this psalm, begins in verses 10 and 11. It's like talking about the faithful worship that goes on in Zion, in Jerusalem, at the temple, the experience of joy, of being in God's house, of receiving His favor, and of His protection and His bounty, His blessing. And this is one of those, we've all heard that song, better is one day in your courts than 1,000 elsewhere. I would rather be a doorkeeper in the house of my God than dwell in the tents of the wicked. Now, doorkeepers, of course, are low-level attendants. That's a low-level job. But that's one of the things that the sons of Korah did. But what's interesting to me is that you can interpret this to mean, I would rather lie as a beggar at the entrance of the temple. It's so important to be there to the psalmist that just because you're in the presence, it doesn't matter if you're the lowest or the highest, you're still going to be in His presence. You're still going to have His bounty, His favor, His blessing, His protection. I'd rather be a beggar lying there at the entry to the temple than to be in the tents of the wicked, to dwell, to live in them. That's the normal place of security, but he's saying that even that is not a place of security in comparison to the love and the joy that is available to us in the presence of God. Verse 11, for the Lord God is a sun and shield. The Lord bestows favor and honor. No good thing does He withhold from those whose walk is blameless. A sun and shield, this is a source of light and protection. Light and protection. God promises that we will be protected and that we will have light. And then finally, verse 12, Lord Almighty, blessed is the one who trusts in you. I don't know about you, but sometimes that's the hardest thing, is to trust that God has things in control, that God's in charge, that God will take care of us, especially when we don't see a way out. But one thing I can tell you is that when we spend time in His presence, when we spend time in His house, when we spend time in one of those sacred places that I was talking about earlier, where we can meet with Him, where we can still our minds and hear His voice. That can be in the sanctuary of our church. That can be outdoors. That can be anywhere. That's an interesting thing, is that when I've led groups to Israel, more often than not, those people have not heard God's voice in the churches that are built near these sacred places, but in the outdoors, knowing and seeing the places where Jesus walked. That's where a lot of people can shut their mind off enough and to hear the voice of the Lord and to feel His presence. Now, for us today, I think that our great goal is to know Him, acknowledge His name, and to feel His presence. And when we don't feel it, it's probably because we haven't been practicing it. And so my charge to you today is to practice the presence of the Lord. Practice. How do you do that? You do that by reading Scripture. You do that by prayer. You do that by coming to church. You do that by watching Sunday school videos. You do this. These are ways that we can draw closer to God just by knowing about His character, about all the aspects of God. We learn so much about Him, and it becomes easier and easier to be in His presence. I want to so long and yearn and faint for the presence of God that I don't want anything else beside that. Or that's the thing I want the most, is to be with Him, just like the psalmist said. And as we close today, Let's hear this song that's based on those first words of this beautiful psalm. How lovely are thy dwelling places! My soul longs for the courts of the Lord. My heart and my flesh sing for joy to the living God. You are my King and my God. Let's sing together. How lovely are thy dwelling places! My soul longs for the courts of the Lord. My heart and my flesh sing for joy to the living God. You are my King and my God. How lovely are thy dwelling places! My soul longs for the courts of the Lord. My heart and my flesh sing for joy